Hello, and welcome to First Draft. I am Julia Kelly, and I'm joined by Alexis Anne and Mary Chris Escobar, and tonight we are talking about pulling out that old manuscript that you have sitting in the back of a drawer somewhere. We want to walk you guys through what two of us did, and my two partners in crime here did, and I'm going to sit back and drink wine and enjoy hosting because I haven't done this yet. So this is going to be a learning experience for me too. But as always, we're going to go ahead and start by kind of introducing ourselves a little bit more formally and saying hello. So Alexis Anne, if you want to start.
Hi, I'm Alexis Anne. You can find me at alexisannebooks.com. I write erotic and contemporary romances, and I guess that's it.
Yeah, it's easy this week.
Yeah. I am Mary Chris Escobar. I write women's fiction, and you can find me at marychrisescobar.com. I am also enjoying a glass of wine that happens to be an older bottle of wine, meaning I opened it last week, so super appropriate. We're talking about pulling things out of the drawer. I pulled out an old glass of wine for the night. So.
Yeah, I actually did the same thing, which probably is not the best decision I've ever made, but
yeah.
Sometimes wine is wine. I'm Julia Kelly. I'm a contemporary and historical romance author, and again, I'm the one who's going to be sitting back and relaxing tonight. They're on the hot seat because this is all about them. So yeah, so we're going to go ahead and start off talking about taking a manuscript from kind of its orphaned, abandoned state all the way through to publication, which both Alexis and Mary Chris have done. So I'm going to open it up to kind of the origin story and ask you guys, with the two books that you did, what it was that made you start writing it and why you put it down and abandon your manuscript. And then maybe we'll jump into the what made you pick it back up again after we've heard from both of you. So who would like to start?
I think Mary Chris should start tonight.
Go for it.
Oh, you both want to sit back and relax.
Okay, more wine.
That's what it saves me from my bad wine, so that's fine. So it was a long time ago, so I have to kind of actually think about this. But the novel that I wrote that I put in the drawer was actually the second novel. So it was, I guess, my sophomore novel. I had finished my first novel, and I actually was working with an agent at the time, so there's a little bit of backstory. I had an agent representing my first novel, Never-Ending Beginnings, and we went to editors and it never sold, so that's kind of the backstory. But Never-Ending Beginnings was being shopped to editors, and so I'd been told you should write something else while that's happening, and so I wrote the novel that I ended up putting in the drawer, and I wrote it in its entirety and shopped it to the agent that I was working with at the time, who ended up not really loving it for some good reasons. At the time I was kind of like, I don't know, it seems pretty good to me, but I'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about kind of why I resurrected it. But I just kind of put it away because I didn't really know where to go from there. I didn't have an idea for a third novel at that point. I was like, but I've written two. what? I don't know if I have any more. So I just put it away because it was kind of not going the direction I wanted it to go, and I guess put it away to think of something else to write. And that's kind of how it originated.
And just to clarify, this was a completed novel, or this was a novel that was kind of almost to the point where...
It was complete.
It was, okay.
It was totally complete. I had written it, I had gone back and done at least one pass of revisions, so totally complete.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about you, Alexis?
It was my first manuscript that I had completed as a grown adult. I was going to say a bad word. Sorry. My problem had been for a long time that I would start a manuscript and get about halfway through and either get bored with the story, or I would have no idea where to take the plot from there because I was totally panstering things, or I would just chicken straight up out. So I gave myself a challenge to write a complete novel, good or bad, in 30 days. And I did. and it had a lot of really good things going for it and a lot of really not so good things going for it because I had written by the seat of my pants for 30 days. And then I revised it twice, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it wasn't getting better. And I didn't know what to do with it, and at the time, So You Think You Can Write was coming up, and I had an idea for that, and I submitted it, and it finaled. So I just kind of totally put the story in a drawer and said I don't know what to do with it anymore, and walked away and did something else, and it took a few manuscripts before I got back to it. Did that cover everything?
Yeah. So why don't you pick up with why did you pick it back up after those couple of manuscripts that you finished? What made you go ahead and say, you know, maybe I should pull this out of the drawer? Or the hard drive, whatever it is.
It's both. Here, here it is, right here. I was working on paper a lot back then still. It's a nice thick, baby here with all of the really ugly stuff inside. Ooh, part 1. I went and read it and was really embarrassed. Basically, I had taken a lot of what I learned on that first manuscript and flipped everything around and wrote the storm inside, which I loved to pieces. But everything was kind of sitting in the back of my head, kind of gnawing at me that you didn't use this part, you didn't write this, you didn't write that. And Mary Chris was talking about how she had pulled her manuscript out of the drawer and how interesting it was to go back through it and realize what some of the flaws were there. And I started thinking about how I really wanted to write a serial. I love writing serials, and I hadn't been doing it because I'd been fixated on only writing full-length novel stuff. And I said, you know what? I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to read the first few chapters, and if they completely suck, then I'm going to just shove it back in the drawer, and this is going to be it. I'm done with it. But I liked it. I really liked the first few chapters. I got all sucked into it, and I started thinking, ooh, I could go this way, I could go that way. And the next thing I knew, I was revising the first few chapters into what became Tease 1, and it just kind of went from there.
So outside of the first 3 chapters, is there a lot that's still true to that original manuscript, or did you really use it as a jumping-off point?
The basic plot line is all still there. But the heroine in particular in my story had to change completely. She was weak. She was very poorly written. I hated her when I went back. It was a large part of why the manuscript didn't work.
Sure. So what about you, Mary Chris? I know that Alexis said that you were working on this when she decided to go ahead and pull out what would eventually become Tease. Mm-hmm. Why did you decide to go back to something that you had kind of let go for a while?
Yeah, and I mean, I want to talk for a second about the fact that it was for a while. I mean, it was for a long while because I wrote this original manuscript, I mean, well before I even met any of you. So it actually just dawned on me when Alexis was talking that, like, how long that span of when I put the novel in the drawer to when I picked it up again was. So I decided to self-publish my first novel, and so I sort of focused on that, and I went to RWA for the first time and learned about a plotting structure called Save the Cat, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, but I kind of got involved in this concept of writing a novella, and I thought, you know, I'm going to try writing a novella using this plotting structure, and I want to try some of the things that I learned at this conference and implement them really quickly. So I wrote Delayed, my novella. And this book was just still like hanging out in the drawer. I hadn't really thought about it. I kind of honestly thought it would just be that one dead book that I would never go back to. A lot of authors talk about it. Yeah, everybody talks about it. And so I guess I'm kind of still waiting now. Like, that's the downside. I'm like, when is the dead book coming? But anyway, I couldn't let go of the characters. I finished the novella, and I started to write the beginning of another novel, and I workshopped it in a writing class that I was taking, and I couldn't get into it, and I kept thinking about the characters in the novel that was sitting in my drawer, and so I pulled it back out, and same kind of thing, I sort of expected to cringe through the entire thing, like, this is just going to be really bad, and there were definitely parts of it that were really bad. For me, most clearly, what needed to go. I had a second narrative that was third person, so it was alternating first and third person, which there are a couple authors that I love that do that really well, that I'm in awe of, because I don't do it very well, which is not really, I wasn't able to see that when I was really close to the work. So I basically stripped out an entire sort of second narrative, and that left me with about half a novel that needed to be fleshed out pretty well.
Okay. So what are the challenges with the mechanics of actually sitting down and ripping this stuff apart? Because that's got to be intimidating. You have 50, 60, maybe 100,000 words, and suddenly you're sitting there looking at it like, oh my God, this is, you know, however many printed pages, or, you know, on your Kindle, however much space it takes up. That's got to be incredibly intimidating to kind of not start from scratch, but to take an existing idea and really try to do something with it, develop something where you know that it didn't work at first. So, Alexis, how did you even attack that?
Well, I didn't for a long time because it was so gut-wrenching and intimidating. It's kind of critiquing yourself in the first place. I mean, you're looking at your work and seeing everything that you did wrong, and that can be kind of depressing. So I didn't do it for a long time, and then when I finally did, I was in a place where I was just really ready to just attack this thing, and it was really clear. I had grown so much as a writer over the 2 years from when I first wrote it until when I pulled it back out, that it was really easy for me to pick out a lot of the flaws that existed in that original manuscript. And for me, since there was a whole plot already, since the characters were already developed, even though I did change my heroine fairly significantly, it was really easy to just take it scene by scene, chapter by chapter, and say, okay, here's what we need to get rid of, and here's what we can do with it, and just go. And then the serial format really lended itself to that kind of thinking, which is why I think it works so well for me.
Yeah, I would say similarly, you know, I think by the time I got ready to pull it out again, I really kind of set a time limit for myself, because, you know, there was this idea that I couldn't keep doing that. I mean, like, I was never going to move forward if I kept going back to this manuscript. So I think it was like a one and done. It's like, I'm going to pull it out, I'm going to just chop it up and totally mutilate it, and if I can make it something useful, great, but if it's not feeling good pretty quickly, like within a month or a couple months, I'm just going to abandon it, because it's not really worth continuing to move forward with something. Like, at that point, I was just going to convince myself I had to let it go. Like, because you don't know when you go to pull it out, like, is it really that there's something worth it there, or am I just having trouble letting it go or letting the characters go, and should I just write an entire new book, like, instead of that? But, you know, I definitely found the same thing. My writing, I mean, similar, like, we're talking 2, 3, maybe more years, and I definitely could tell, you know, an improvement in my writing, but also just an improvement in, like, very clearly being able to see, like, the ridiculousness of the second narrative, and, like, why, like, that was just bizarre, and why I ever had it there in the first place. I think part of the reason that was there, and this is probably a little bit part of the backstory, but I was trying to write a very kind of big, high concept story. I write very quiet stories. It doesn't come naturally for me to write sort of that high concept, big drama. And I think when I pulled it out to rework it, I really realized I was trying to fit myself into some kind of bubble that I don't fit in very well, and I just had gotten much clearer about who I was as a writer.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Keep going.
That's a really interesting point. It's especially with early manuscripts. A lot of the time, we as writers are still mimicking things that we read and styles that we admire, and we haven't really developed our own style and our own voice so much yet. And even with later manuscripts, sometimes you read something and it triggers a story idea, and you take off on a plot idea, and it isn't until you've completed it that you realize it sucks. But sometimes it doesn't work because it's not you.
So what were the things that you guys think taught you to get to that point where you could recognize what was you and what wasn't you? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of, I don't want to say soul searching, because it doesn't sound quite as deliberate as that, but you've been doing work and you've done things, and these were not your first books. to go through the whole publication process, and both of you are self-published, so you really were very hands-on through the whole publication process. What were some of the things that were flagged for you when you went back and looked at those manuscripts? I mean, whatever it is, whether it's plot development, character, mechanics.
For me, I had shoved everything I could think of into that plot. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was dramatic. There was a love story. There was something going on with her family. I mean, it was just one thing after another. I needed to pick a horse and ride it. There was too much going on in the story, and so by deciding that Tease wanted to be an erotic serial, it was really easy to really focus in on the romance and strip out a lot of the other stuff that I had so gracefully shoved into that poor little plot.
Shoved is a very graceful word.
The other big thing for me was being able to see which parts of the story were me telling a story and which parts were me maybe therapeutically living through my characters and being able to say, this is not a story, this is me journaling, and this is a story, and being able to separate the two.
Yeah, I think it's something that's hard to put a finger on, but definitely having just a clearer vision of who I was as a writer. One of the things that stuck out to me so much when I pulled out that manuscript was that I just don't have much experience writing in third person, and it's something that I want to work on, but I've written both my novels and my novella in first person. I read a lot of books written in first person, and actually I think before I pulled out the novella, before I pulled out the novel in the drawer, I had started taking a writing class and workshopping the beginning of another novel, and I was specifically trying to do it in third person and get some really good feedback. And I got a lot of good feedback, by which I mean quite a bit of criticism. And I think one of my biggest problems in third person, and I'll never forget the writing teacher's way of phrasing it, I walk my characters across the room. I don't do that in first person, but in third person I would have the character get up off the couch and walk into the kitchen and remove the water bottle from the refrigerator and pour it. I mean, it was ridiculous, instead of just
to avoid. It really is.
Yes, and I had no idea how tough it was to avoid, and so throughout that novel that I put in the drawer, the whole third person narrative, I wasn't avoiding it. I just had all this sort of ridiculous description, and so I think just realizing where my weaknesses were as a writer, and it's not that I'm never going to write anything in third person, but it's something I really need to work on and would need to plan quite a bit of time for revision, more than I usually do, to make sure that I was really getting that right and editing all that out.
I definitely feel you on that one.
It's really hard.
You mentioned the writing class. Is there anything else over your experience for the last few years that's kind of really helped? Whether it's, I know we talk a lot about RWA on First Draft because it is where we met and we are, we all do go. But outside of the more formal settings, what else has helped you develop that sense of kind of who you are as a writer and what you do want to do and what you don't want to do?
I have an answer.
Yeah, go for it.
Me too.
Like I said, I'm just drinking wine, so.
One of the big things, and I was just thinking about it this week because I'm reading A.L. Park's newest novel right now, is reading other people's stuff, and especially not just reading another book, but critiquing someone else's stuff. I really think that the critique process is a reciprocal kind of thing, because even though it's not my work, it raises questions in me about my own work. It was something, I was reading one of her chapters, and I went, oh, that's what's wrong with my chapter, and went back and fixed something right then and there. So it's a different process, but it's so beneficial to you to read and critique someone else's work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the more you read, period, I mean, whether it's, other people's finished works or critiquing their work, but I definitely think critiquing and being critiqued, so continuing to write and continuing to receive critique, also strengthened my writing, definitely. Another thing I think for me is blogging. I think weekly blogging has really, as much as sometimes I gnashed my teeth about doing it, which my husband can attest to that. I'm like, oh, it's time to write the blog again. But I actually think it's helped me find my voice. It's gotten me in the habit of writing pretty quickly. So I I definitely think that also editing out unnecessary words. I try to keep my blogs pretty short, so it's made me more comfortable kind of taking out those extraneous words and trying to make them short little snippets. So I completely 100% agree with probably the biggest thing has been critiquing and being critiqued, but I think a second thing is regular blogging, just regular writing in any form.
Yeah, I think exposure to, just to pick up what you guys said about exposure to critiquing and even going through the revision process. I revised a novel I wrote a few years ago and hadn't looked at for a year and a half, and it's pretty stunning to look at how much you've grown, because you don't feel like you're growing as an author necessarily, because you're doing it every day. If you're really sitting down and you're committing to a writing career, and I mean, sometimes it feels like going to the gym and going and exercising, where you're like, you don't necessarily see the results immediately, and then you go back and look, and it's pretty startling in a really positive way. It's really startling to look at some work that you haven't picked up in a while and to think to yourself, oh, that's not how I do that now. And to get an opportunity to go back and rework something or to completely transform something into, something more than it was must be a great experience. And to bring all that knowledge that you had to a manuscript that was orphaned and sad and alone in its drawer.
Or manuscript.
Yeah, and I think time away from it, I think we've both sort of talked about that, but I think just the sheer passage of time, I think you're able to be more critical of your own work and have a different perspective on it when you didn't just write it. Even finishing a draft and taking a few days off and going back makes a big difference, but certainly when you put it away and you go back, which obviously you don't have time to do that with every book you write, but when it does happen that you've put it away for a couple years, you really are going to notice things when you go back. You can't, it's almost like picking up something someone else wrote. It doesn't have that freshness to it.
Absolutely.
I was listening to a podcast called Story Wonk, and Lonnie Diane Rich is the romance author on it, and she said that her belief is you should leave something for 6 weeks, which is obviously when you're on, different publishing schedules allow for that or don't allow for it, but her point was you should get to a point where you don't necessarily recognize immediately the words that you've written. I think that sometimes if you're really stuck and if you're really having trouble, that can be hugely helpful, because it's your work, but it looks less like your work than if you put it down for a day or two.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely like getting away from my work for more than a couple of days. I do appreciate being able to send either of you something and be like, just read it and tell me what's going on, please.
I have one of those things right now.
Because sometimes you just need someone else's perspective. Mm-hmm. But I really do like being able to put something away for at least a couple of weeks and come back to it. Because not even for the fresh eye aspect, but for it's been stewing in the back of my mind. Why did this scene bother me so much? And then sometimes you have that light bulb moment while you're washing your hair and go, oh, and then you can fix it before you torture or critique people with it.
Not torture.
Not torture. So was there anything that surprised you guys about kind of getting to the end of, you have this book, you thought it wasn't going to be a thing, then it becomes a thing, and you go through critiques, you go through the whole process, and with both of you self-publishing, you hit upload. What does it feel like afterwards? Is it different than a book that you've gone through and written straight through, or?
I think for me, not so much at that point that I hit upload, but I was really nervous, and I think I probably expressed this to you guys. I was really nervous sending it out for, someone other than me to read for the first time. And some of that could have been because it was a book that I sort of had some rejection from in the past. But I think, I think it was just, you put a lot into it and you make this commitment to, I'm going to spend this time to sort of pull this thing out, and rework it. And so I definitely was more nervous than for example, I wrote the novella Delayed, and you all critiqued that for me. I was much less nervous about that, even though I think I had just met you all before I wrote that, and it was the first thing I had sent you. I was less nervous about that than I was about this project that I had pulled out of the drawer. So I think I just felt really anxious and nervous about sharing it with someone, because and some of that was just because it had been only in my head and only on my computer and in my eyes for so long. It had lived in there, and I was like, I don't know if I can see it objectively anymore. I think it's to a point where it's decent, but but I feel like I felt like I wasn't very objective about it.
I felt the opposite. I felt like I own this finally after all these years. And thinking about it and leaving it there after I pulled it out and rethought it completely, and I was really happy with it once it was done. I was like, yes, finally I can walk away from this manuscript. I'm good.
So it had a finality and a closure.
It did. It's nice. It's really nice to have that closure, to look at that binder behind me, which has been sitting there since we moved in, and know that can't haunt me anymore.
Yeah, its story has been told.
It has been told. And the parts that got sliced out, they can die of death now and be buried.
Yeah, sometimes you cut out parts of your narrative and you think to yourself, yeah, maybe this is a kill your darlings moment, and sometimes you're just like, no, die now.
Yeah.
I solidly had both kinds of moments in the revisions of Tease, because there were some that I was like, oh, I'm so sad to see this go. It doesn't fit. It just needs to go, and I'm heartbroken. And then there were parts where it was like, can I burn this? Can we pretend I never wrote this?
Yeah, we're just not claiming ownership of that.
Yeah, you asked earlier about whether it was hard to like rip apart a book. No, for me, like that third person stuff, like if I could permanently delete it somehow, like that would be absolutely, like, I don't want anyone to find that when I'm done and gone. Like, it's just really bad. I don't want someone to think it's like a book I tried to,
I was such a different person when I wrote that first book, and the character that eventually became Elizabeth, sorry, she changed names between the two manuscripts. I did not like her at all, and I'm embarrassed that I wrote her, to be perfectly honest. And I wonder about myself 2 years ago and what was wrong with me if I wrote that kind of character. So I'm glad she's gone and has been stripped from the narrative and replaced by Elizabeth, who's kind of cool.
And it's a lesson to never again, right?
Yes. I was actually just reminding myself of that today when I was going through revisions on Stripped, and was like, oh, that's what's wrong with this chapter. She's too much like that character in that original manuscript. She needs to die right now.
There you go. So is there anything we haven't... I know. I was going to say, I'm looking at the time, and we usually run an hour, but I'm like I said, I'm just hosting this thing. So is there anything you guys...
Now we both have things to say.
I know, everybody's saying things at the same time.
Go ahead.
Me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It's interesting because we had kind of brought up before the show, what makes you put a manuscript in the drawer versus push through and go ahead and revise it. And I do have a manuscript technically in the drawer right now because I loved it, I was writing it, and it fell flat for me. I knew it wasn't right, and I also knew that I didn't have the heart in me to work through it right then when I had other projects coming up and things that I needed to work on. So into the drawer it went, and it's sitting there, and it's coming out in December because that's when I have scheduled for it to come out, and it will get revised and it will get finished and published. So I was just, I was going to throw the question out there to the audience. Even Julia, if she wants to kick in on this one.
Oh, you want to actually answer stuff?
You don't have to. I was just offering. What makes you put a novel in a drawer versus, pushing through?
I mean, I think in some ways it's exactly what you said. You don't have the heart to work through it right then, or you know that something isn't working and you're not sure what it is. I think it's the not sure that's the toughest thing. And I've talked about it on here before. I'm a fast drafter for the most part. So I write through, and then I found that usually what I do now is I kind of get to the end of an act and I go back and then I revise that, and that fills in the fast draft, and that becomes draft 1. So it's like draft 1 and draft 1.5. And then, or draft a half and then draft 1. And then I can kind of go, okay, that's better, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick up with the rest of the story. That's a very different feeling than a book. I have a dead book, and I have a book that's waiting in the back of my head. And then I have stuff that I don't have time to write right now. I've had to reprioritize for various reasons, and those are all three very different things. So you can have a project list where stuff is partially written, and you know as soon as you have time, you're going to go back and work on it. You have stuff that's completely dead, where you're just like, I just don't think this is going to work. I hate it for whatever reason. And then you have the stuff that goes into the drawer that hopefully will get pulled out again at some point. And I think that with the pulled out again part, it's what you guys have said. There are parts that are good. There are parts that you like, there are parts you love, but there's something very much not working about it. And so I have one of those where it's sitting on the shelf, and it's also in a paper binder because I do print out a hard copy of everything. And I know one of these days I'm going to get back to it. It's a small town contemporary romance, and I would love to develop a whole world, and I think that would be great. And that's just not what I wanted to focus on right now, and I got part of the way through it. Part of it's that it's a NaNoWriMo book, so it's just a flaming mess. It's just terrible. But it has elements of stuff that really could be good. And so eventually I'll end up pulling that book out, and I'll probably go back and rewatch this and kind of, as I'm crying tears of, why did I do this? I'll call you guys and I'll make you talk me through it. But yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with if you see that potential there.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it is. It's a different feeling. It's almost that thing that's a little indescribable, like when a story kind of grabs you and won't let go. You know, maybe you kind of acknowledge that pieces of it needed to go, but for some reason, like, it keeps sneaking back in. But yeah, I think it's hard for me to quantify the difference between, you have rough moments in writing where you're like, I don't know if I can go on with this story. I think putting it in the drawer has to do with not being able to stop that. Meaning, usually you can interrupt. For me, I can interrupt. Like, if I get to a point where I'm just sick of what I'm writing, I can put it aside for a couple days and I'll keep coming back to it. Like, I'll keep thinking about it when I'm walking to work, or it'll keep popping in my head, and I'll come up with a solution. So that's really a technique of, like, I just need to step away a little bit, just like you both have said. But I think with the one that kind of went in the drawer, it was just, maybe I just needed to step away that long, because the characters did eventually come back. But at the moment that I put it away, I was really ready to move on. I was just like, I'm done with this. I don't see any future for it. So, and it wasn't until a couple years later that the characters kind of came back to me.
How do you identify when a manuscript isn't working, other than just that, like, gut feeling? You talked about you had some critiques who were telling you that it wasn't working, but
yeah, I mean, that definitely helped. I will be honest, it probably took my gut feeling that it wasn't working for me to actually put it away, and not just keep working on it. But yeah, I think it is kind of just a feeling. Now, I do think if you're getting sort of consistent critiques that something isn't working, it definitely is time to look at it yourself. And I think, maybe I can see that after it's been brought to light in a critique. But it really is almost just kind of a gut feeling. I don't have a great answer for that, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's total instinct. I don't, it's a little like when people say, where do you get your ideas from? And it's like, I can't tell you. I don't. It's just one of those things where at this point I pushed through writing a few manuscripts, and I got to a point where I was like, okay, I know when something's flowing, and when something's flowing, it's easy. When you know that you almost can't write fast enough, that's a great feeling. It doesn't happen very often, or at least it doesn't happen very often for me. So most of what I do is the daily sit down, and it's not a slog. It's putting in the miles before you do the marathon, or in order to train for the marathon, right? You have to do it consistently, and if you don't do it consistently, you're not going to be able to get the end goal, which is, in running is a marathon. In writing, it's the full manuscript, so that you actually have something to revise. And it's not even like I get to a point where I feel like I'm beating my head against the wall, or I get writer's block or anything like that. Sometimes some manuscripts, you just get this feeling where you're just like, you know what, I need to set it aside. It's not the right thing right now, and it's not helpful when I'm saying, I realize, but that's just kind of the way that I've been before. Did you have that experience too, Alexis?
Yeah, that's why I was asking you guys, because it is it's a gut thing, and I don't know how to quantify that for someone else. It's just, I guess if the voices keep saying this isn't right, and you have that sinking feeling, and you want someone to tell you that it's all right all the time, then it's probably not right, because you're looking for someone else to reassure you, and you should know. You should know that it's right, that your characters are solid, that your plot's solid, that it may not work for everyone, but it works, and it works because you made it that way. So if you're having doubts and gut instincts, then there's definitely something that's not working.
Yeah, I think that, again, it's just one of those things that people ask about, and I wish that I could tell people. I don't know. There are some things that it's personal, and maybe some writers know, if I'm not hitting a word count, but everybody's different, right?
Yeah, and I think, as you get more, I think that gut instinct improves as you get more clear in your voice. I mean, if I could sort of pinpoint one thing about that novel that I probably, looking back, knew the whole time, like I mentioned before, I was definitely trying to shove myself into some sort of formula that didn't work for me. And I probably, on some level, knew that when I was writing it, but was just kind of pushing through and blind to the fact that, like, oh yeah, no, I can make this work. I can write in this way. So I do think that gut instinct about whether something is workable or something you need to set aside gets stronger the stronger you get in who you are as a writer and who your voice is.
Definitely. Did you talk about how you saved the cat to restructure it?
Yeah. All right. So
save the cat.
Out of us. So you should absolutely talk about this.
I forgot about the cat.
Save the cat.
Let's go back and save him. So actually, at the first RWA conference, I stumbled into this session. I just kind of didn't have anything to go to during a particular time, and so I stumbled into this session about a plot structure called Save the Cat, and I have since done a little more research about it. It's actually a screenwriting technique that the author who was giving the presentation had adapted for writing fiction, and one of the things that she touted that you could use it to do, one was just use it from the beginning as a plotting structure, but she also claimed that Save the Cat could save your novel. And so I think that is kind of maybe a little bit where the spark to pull that novel back out, aside from the characters popping back up in my head. I used that plot structure to write Delayed, and I liked it, and I wanted to try it in a short format like a novella first, but I liked it, and so I think that in combination with sort of the characters coming back into my head, I was like, well, maybe I should try this plotting structure and try pulling out that terrible third-person narrative and then running, the first-person story that I really liked through the plot structure to see, if truly I can use it to save the novel, and it really did. One of the things that I've always struggled with, again, because I do write pretty quiet, character-driven stories, I struggle with plot. I mean, it's always something that I have to go back and flesh out and make sure something's happening. I always have to make my drama bigger when that's my going back and shading, and I always have to, if characters are fighting, it's always extremely realistic to begin with and never as big as it probably should be on the page. And it probably still isn't as big as it could be, but it's what feels right to me. So for me, that plotting structure really helps to have something keep me on track about, okay, we're getting to this point, something needs to happen, because I could just write a character's thoughts for a really long time probably and be just fine. So it really did help. It helped me. It added in some B story. It added in actually kind of helped me figure out a twist that I could do with that second narrative to sort of still involve it in a much more interesting way than it was in the beginning. So yeah, I would highly recommend that.
It's funny you mentioned that with Delayed that you used it, because I remember it was the first critique that we had from you, and I think that it was after a month of knowing each other, and maybe 2 months, and you sent us a draft with the plot beats still in it. So it was the first time I actually had seen a novel laid out fully with, and for some bizarre reason, the one that always sticks out is Fun and Games, probably because I'm sitting there what is Fun and Games? But no, it makes perfect sense, and so it was fascinating seeing a novel, because I always worry about, is it going to be formulaic if you do that? But no, it's just a way of guiding you, and again, making sure that something is progressing and moving forward, and you're not stalling and getting that dreaded, sagging middle type of situation going on.
Exactly, which I definitely had a problem with. So it did help. And that was funny because I also wrote that novel. It was my first experience with Scrivener, and I didn't know how to pull those out before I sent it to you guys. But yeah, I mean, it helps with that sagging middle, and it helped pull everything together, because what I was left with when I pulled out the second narrative in my novel was really just kind of a lot of first-person thoughts of one character. There wasn't much plot. The plot was really in that second narrative, so it helped a lot. I was just going to say I'm not a plotter, so it really does help me to use a structure, because I can write that beat almost as a writing prompt.
I was just going to throw my huge support behind Save the Cat or any other technique like that. I think it's a really interesting idea to throw out there. If you are having a manuscript that is a problem and you're pulling it out of a drawer, put it up against something like Save the Cat, which I really do like, because I do think in kind of a screenwriting format, which I think a lot of us of our generation do because we were raised on TV and movies. So if you can compare your plot and your characters against something like Save the Cat, it can kind of help you hone in and identify where you do have issues and problems that you can go rethink and work on. But with Tease, I was going to go from there. It has its own formula because I did it as a serial instead of a full-length novel, and serials are episodic. So I had to look at each part of my plot and see where I could pull the next episode out of. And each episode had its own arc with a beginning and an end and tension and something that had to feel complete, but still leave you with something to look forward to in the next section, which works in novel length as well. But because of the serial format, I was forced into some sort of format while I was looking at my plot and my character. So it was a similar kind of thing. I didn't use Save the Cat, but it was similar. Dead space.
Yeah. Sorry, I got nothing.
I mean, I can keep talking.
I'm actually.
We can save
here,
more cats.
I probably need to order a copy of Save the Cat, because I don't know if I still have my notes from that lecture, but yeah, no, it is hugely helpful to sit there. And again, I don't think you should adhere strictly to any particular writing technique 100% of the time. I think some things are going to work better for different books, but at the same time, I think sometimes you get stuck and you need to get out of your own head, and it's great getting critiques and having critique partners, but also there are times where literally you read somebody's manuscript and you're like, I don't know what it needs, but it needs something, and it's just not working for me, and I wish I could help you, I wish I could identify that. And sometimes having that outside influence coming in and really forcing you to look at it as objectively as possible, because it's nearly impossible to do, right? It's really tough to look at your own work and to say this is what's working, this is what's not working, and be completely honest about it, because on some level you're invested, and it helps to have kind of some sort of framework, not even a formula, a framework to look at your work from. So whatever ends up working for you, and there are so many techniques out there. I mean, you do have to kind of try some on for size and see what works for you and what your deficiencies are in your writing. And I know I struggle with the emotional thought in writing. I much prefer to write dialogue. I would write a whole book of dialogue if I could. But I have to sit down and kind of sit there and say, all right, when somebody's saying this, without saying they felt nervous, what am I going to do to indicate that that's what is going on and going through their head, and why does that matter for the larger story? So that's one of the things that I have to pull through and make sure that I've got all those inner points. So it's like a inner emotional Save the Cat.
There's a fruit fly in my house. Sorry.
It's just waving at the camera.
It's after my bad wine.
Oh yeah, no, mine's terrible.
I also have this, it's The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. I haven't opened it yet, but it looks...
It's really big.
In front of it.
It looks very informative, so if you need help, with your writing and your plot, you might want to check that out. I should open it one day.
I have a really hard time with buying.
Huge.
I actually just stopped myself from buying more writing books because I love writing books, but then I never use them. It was one of those things where having them made me feel like I was doing something, and I realized at some point I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting down and, still writing and still, not really cracking the book, and so I needed to stop. But I think Save the Cat sounds like it might help with this small town romance that I will eventually want to pull off the shelf.
Well, and I will actually, I'll give you a confession. I don't actually have the book. I have a PowerPoint presentation from RWA, and that's what I use.
Tricky.
Yeah, and I'm happy to. I'll share it with you. I'll send it to you. But I actually have not read the whole book because I feel like I don't need that much information. Like, I like looking at how the person who gave the presentation structured the beats, and I've done some research on it just because I was curious. Actually, I was trying to figure out like what the whole cat reference was. Like, what is this thing?
Yeah.
So I did a little bit more research on it, and what I found is there's probably a little more detail. Well, obviously, a lot more detail in the book than in what I use, and I don't want all that detail. Like, the points that she had outlined worked for me, and I don't want to know all the nitty-gritty detail of like each beat and each act, and so I haven't even really looked into getting the whole book. So
you can Google Save the Cat, and it'll give you a basic framework. And that's what I have saved on my computer. Because it works for plotting. If you're like, I don't know where this is going, I look at Save the Cat sometimes and I go, oh, I need to put something here that moves the plot along, and it just kind of helps drive those questions in the back of your mind that you should be asking yourself, but sometimes you don't remember to do.
Yeah, exactly. And there is tons of information on Google. I should say that, because I probably shouldn't be emailing around my PowerPoint to everyone. So yes, if you just Google Save the Cat, there's a lot of really good information.
Nice. Well, unless there's more.
I think we've covered it. It's its own beast to pull a manuscript out of the drawer, but in the end it comes back to the same revision process.
No, it does. And it comes back to the same critique process and going through the whole thing, and there is a cycle to everything.
And definitely it comes, I think it's something with time, as you strengthen as a writer, you'll get the instinct that you need to figure out, do I pull it out of the drawer, what's the right thing to do. So I think it's just one of those things that as time passes you get more confident with.
And it's okay to put something in the drawer. That was what was really tough for me in the first place. It was like I was giving up, or I wasn't good enough or something, and I was failing, or I just worked for all these months on something that I was putting in a freaking drawer and no one was going to see. It's okay. Sometimes you need to put it in the drawer. It comes back out. It's been a couple of years, but it came out. It's a book. People buy it and read it now. It's awesome.
Yeah, one of the reasons that we were talking before we actually went on air with this, I didn't have anything that I published that had been pulled out because I wasn't writing seriously for long enough. So I just, at some point, I have started accumulating enough manuscripts, and I think that most writers have something in the back of their, hard drive or on a shelf or under their bed or in a drawer that eventually they'll get back to. And I think that as you write more and more and you try out ideas and you realize that doesn't quite work for what I want to do right now, you maybe shelve it and you come back to it, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a do or die type of situation. Like, you can actually go back to your books, and once abandoned, it doesn't mean that you can never get it back again, unless you don't back your hard drive up, which is a whole other story. But yeah, I think that is an important lesson to learn, and to realize that sometimes it's just not the right time.
Yeah,
and that's okay.
Yeah, and we love you no less for that.
I might love you more, actually, for having the courage to put something away instead of forcing onto the world a story that's not ready.
Yes.
It's okay. Let it nurture, let it grow, put out a better story when it's ready instead of putting out something that needs work.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than putting something out that you don't feel like totally confident, because no matter how you're publishing it, whether it's traditional or indie publishing, you are selling that book, and so you should believe in it 100%. And if you don't, absolutely, I agree. Courage is the right word. I mean, have the courage to put it away and start on the story that really is the one that you're going to be proud to market and talk about and have out there as your story.
Word.
I agree. All right, so why don't we wrap this thing up with talking about kind of what projects you've got going on, what you'd like to promo, whatever it is that you feel like. Who wants to start? Well, you know what? We started with Alexis last time, so let's start with Mary Chris.
Okay. Let's see, what am I doing? Well, the novel that came out of the drawer is How to Be Alive, and so that is my most recent full-length novel, and so it is
right
out now.
I see it right now.
It is right behind me. Oh, and it's right there as well. So that is the novel that came out of the drawer, so super excited about that. And I'm working on a companion novella to that novel with 2 of the side characters from that. It's almost done, so I have about 3, well, the first rough draft is almost done, so that's out there. Also, I referenced a couple times the novella Delay that I wrote in between my first novel and pulling my novel out of the drawer, and that novel is actually available, or that novella is available free wherever you like to get ebooks. So if you're listening to this and you've never tried any of my writing, perfect time to sample with that free copy of Delayed.
Get it now!
Yes. And don't worry, we'll stay on top of her about that other book because I want to read it too. So
I am literally three beats away in Save the Cat from the end.
Hey.
Yeah.
There you go.
I'm so excited. I can't wait to read this. Was it my turn?
Yes.
Okay. I have 2 follow-ups coming in the next few months, hopefully. Revisions go well. I have the follow-up to Tease, which is called Stripped. It's about Travis, who is Adam's best friend. It's another sexy but a little bit more fun, not quite so serious, fun serial. And then the follow-up to The Storm Inside, which is called When Lightning Strikes, and it follows Greg, which was Jake's friend. Apparently I'm into friends in this particular cycle of books. You can get all of Tease right now. This is sampler I give out for free to people sometimes when they're nice to me. So if any of you are nice to me, I might send this to you. But there's also the full paperback, and you can read Tease 1 for free. That's it. That's all I got.
Oh, there you go. One Week in Wyoming came out, which I think it was out when we talked last time. Yeah. Alexis, make noise so the thingy pops up.
This is the absolutely gorgeous paperback of 1 Week in Wyoming.
There you go, yes. So that's my debut. And that's out now. It's out on ebook and paperback, and it's all sorts of beautiful places, beautiful people, and very excited about that. And other than that, I'm just working. So, yeah, hopefully at some point I'll have something to tell you guys, but there's a lot of, the dirty little secret that nobody tells you in publishing before you first start is that there's a lot of hurry up and wait. So you write a lot and then you send it to places, or you publish it or whatever, and then you write a lot. That's kind of how it works. So that's what I'm doing right now, and it's a good thing. But yeah, so we've got there is some fun stuff coming up in the next few months. I've got a bunch of author interviews and stuff like that coming up in my blog, but we've got something brewing for the holiday season, which is very exciting. So stay tuned and see what ends up happening with that. We'll talk about that more as the all of the holidays approach. So hopefully we'll have some things from a lot of different authors for you guys to enjoy. But other than that, we are, I think, wrapping up because we're almost to our full hour. So we will be back in November, I believe. Some version of the 3 of us will be back in November, talking about some topic that we don't know about yet. But we'll take suggestions. So if you want to reach out to any of us, we are more than happy to entertain suggestions and requests. So thank you so much for chatting with us about old manuscripts coming back to light, and we will talk to you again on the first Tuesday of every month. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.